Hi, geographers, it's Mrs. T, and this begins week 8, which marks the second half of the semester. We are on the downhill slide now toward the end of our semester. Midterm grades will be posted this week, and I am busy grading the things that you submitted to me over the last 2 or 3 weeks. You should see your grades popping up pretty regularly because I'm staying up late nights doing that. So week 8 is where we are now, and we're going to finish talking about agriculture this week and look at what's called the Green Revolution. I've got green in quotation marks because it maybe means we maybe think of the green meaning a different word these days than it did back in the 1930s when in the United States when the Green Revolution is said to have begun. But we have looked so far at really the first 3 stages of demographic transition, and now with the Green Revolution we are going to look at the stage 4 of the demographic transition, and then also question whether stage 5 of the demographic transition is still a theoretical stage, like some geographers say that it is, or whether population patterns and lifespan patterns have given us evidence that there are some countries in the world that have actually begun the decline of population. So those are that's the game plan for this week. And then we will start looking at the diversity in society. We will look at things like cultural identity, cultural landscapes, language, religion, those kinds of topics between now and the end of the semester. Okay, but let's look at this third agricultural revolution. So you did a project on the second agricultural revolution kind of technology that is still used in so many places in the world today. But in the 1930s in the United States, we had scientists looking to try to increase the yield that you could get from the seeds that were used in farming. So we were looking at issues of being able to produce higher yields of food to support the growing population. In the 1900s, you saw a booming population in countries that had reached the stage 4 of demographic transition. You saw people not really having as many children as they had in the third stage of demographic transition. People were having fewer children, but we were living to much older ages also because of the advancements in the medical field. So remember, when food security becomes more prevalent in a society, and when technology enables fewer people to have to focus on food production, and instead they can focus on other areas like medical research, or in the case of the Green Revolution, biotech advancements in food production, then there can be further changes to agriculture and the food supply, and you see further changes of arable land not being devoted to food production, but maybe for technological uses, like planting fields of corn for ethanol production, or sugarcane for ethanol production, hemp for industrial uses, and these kinds of things. So, we call it the Green Revolution because scientists in the 1930s and 40s tried to focus on how to bring yield of food products up, and industrial projects too. And the way that they did this was hybridizing certain plants initially, but eventually in the 1900s, something called a GMO hit the agricultural world, a genetically modified organism. It didn't just hit the agricultural world, but other aspects of our lives also. And these genetically modified organisms maybe started out as that seed that was going to be planted with some sort of marker added to the genetics of that seed, so that certain pesticides, certain fertilizers, certain other additives, artificial additives that were necessary to keep up the, let me do air quotes here, health of the soil, or the keep down a population of pests, or whether it was a plant pest like a weed, or a critter pest like the boll weevil or something that eats cotton. These kinds of companies, such as Monsanto, some of you culinary students for sure have heard of Monsanto before. I know that you focus on some of the GMO situations, and Food Inc., I believe, is is a documentary that many of you watch. But corporations that could devote money into research and development of green technologies or biotech advancements in the food supply or in agricultural pursuits developed things like Roundup. You've probably heard of that herbicide that has really dominated the agricultural world in the corporate farming realm over the last several decades. So Roundup is an herbicide that has certain genetic markers and it will kill plants. And if you want to have an easy time growing, I'll just use corn again as an example. If you want to have an easy time growing corn during the Green Revolution phase, then the genetic modification to the corn seed would include markers that would make it be able to survive a dose of Roundup, whereas the weeds that might grow up in the cornfield, the weeds would die because they don't have that genetic modification. And so this is called the Green Revolution because it was supposed to promote these seeds and the products to be produced in much higher yield. Now, this day and age, when we say a green revolution, you might think of something about like cutting down greenhouse gases, cutting down emissions in general, cutting down on climate change, like we've had a discussion board topic focusing on. But when we talked about the green revolution in the way we look at it as a third agricultural revolution in cultural geography, this green revolution had a whole lot of artificial components to it. When you had second agricultural revolution technology, then farmers had to use more naturally sustainable methods to fertilize, to irrigate, to get rid of pests with the population of plants that they cultivated, or even the livestock that they cultivated on their farm. So you have read about, and we've talked about crop rotation, for instance. There are some nutrients that this particular crop is going to take out of the soil and put others in. And then those that it puts in, another crop might need, and it takes those out of the soil and puts others in. And so farmers tended to rotate crops from different seasons of the year or every other summer so that they would naturally maintain the levels of nutrients in the soil that were necessary for higher yields. But you still saw a reduction of yield for a lot of the agricultural production. And so some of the diversity in labor, or the division of labor that was created when surplus food was possible, some of those folks concentrated on investigating how do we increase that yield. And so artificial fertilizers, like, I don't know, one of my favorite ones for my plants around the house is Miracle-Gro, but there's nothing in nature that's that blue unless it's something on the periodic table of elements that Mrs. T doesn't know about. So that kind of stuff is an artificial fertilizer that has ramifications for the rest of the environment. It perhaps has some benefit to the plants that's consuming it, but maybe not the microbes in the soil, or maybe runoff would contribute to certain complications in the water supply, for instance. Water is a huge deal in agriculture, and actually one of the primary reasons why warfare over agriculture is fought, because of water supply rights or water supply contamination, those kinds of things. So we're going to look at the third agricultural revolution in this unit. I'm also going to bring this up into more modern times because the artificial nature, the genetic modifications that are done to a lot of these crops has not necessarily been well received by everybody over the almost 100 years since the third agricultural revolution began. Some of the artificial, chemical, and the genetic modification, some of the questions about whether that is safe for human consumption or whether it's safe for other aspects of the environment, those things call into question natural or organic nature of foods that are produced. Also, another beef, I guess you could say, since since we're talking about agriculture. Another point of contention that some folks have is that corporate farming was really the in thing, is really the in thing. When we are talking about biotech advancements, these things can be patented so that only this company or that company has the right to use that seed or that pesticide or that seed pesticide combination, these kinds of things. And so what it does is it really limits the reach or even the rights of the small farmers who do not want to participate in those kinds of biotech advancements. Those were really on the way out for quite a while during the early stages of the Green Revolution. And in recent decades, you see kind of a resurgence in this idea of small farming. You can look up movements such as the slow food movement or locavorism. I'm not even sure if YouTube's captions will spell locavore correctly, but about 15 years ago or so, that word was actually added to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And these kinds of movements are kind of resistant to these corporate farming practices, genetic modified organisms, and these biotech advancements, I'll use my air quotes, simply because it is harsh on the environment. So when we hear in modern politics about something called the Green New Deal, it's a completely different green that we're talking about in modern times than this third agricultural revolution. So please make sure when you're reading in chapter 11, if you have the 12th edition of the textbook like I do, chapter 11 is the agriculture chapter. When you're reading about the third agricultural revolution, the Green Revolution, please notice the difference. It's not talking about the way we talk about green or solar or organic in this day and age. This is from a previous era in our history. So let's look at this green revolution a little bit more, and we will look at industrialization of the food supply and get this cultured meat and other lab-produced protein sources. Oh yes, we will look at that soon. Thanks.